Y'all want to go ahead and open up to Hebrews 3. I'll be there in a second. So, a couple of years, I got off social media like totally completely, and I probably do what's worse now. I read the news a little more often. And I remember it was a couple days ago, I saw an article on Fox News, and it was talking about a gentleman who was going to read the New Testament strictly from memory. It was actually live streamed in Dallas yesterday. They were doing like a segment, and so I briefly read about it, and his name is Tom Meyer. He's a professor of Bible studies from Northern Kentucky, and I did a little research, and he's actually known as the Memory Bible Man, I think is how he calls himself, or how he refers to himself. And over 20 years, he memorized 20 books. So of course, I take a moment and I'm like, man, that's crazy. You're memorizing the entire Bible. And then another worst thing I do, I start making comparisons to myself. Wow, wish I could do that. I remember Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Every beefhead lifting weights, they have Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So what starts with that leans to, am I doing what's good for God? Am I doing enough? Am I even good enough? So sometimes as we struggle and run through those personal inadequates about ourselves, I remembered a section from Hebrews in chapter 3 about how we're not called to perfection, but just remain faithful to the end because we can't be perfect. There was only one. And so just a quick backdrop in Hebrews 1, we're reminded that God sent Jesus as the greatest messenger that was ever sent. In chapter 2, he secured a salvation that's greater than anything that man could ever make. And he sat down at the right hand of God as our high priest and is currently representing us. And so as we read chapter 3, starting in verse 1, therefore, holy brethren, partakers of a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession. He was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was in all his house. For he has been counted worthy of much more of more glory than Moses, but just so much as the builder of the house has more honor than the house. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant for a testimony of those things which were to be spoken later. But Christ was faithful as a son over his house, whose house we are, if we hold fast our confidence and the boast of our hope firm until the end. Therefore, just as the Holy Spirit says, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me. As in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me by testing me, and saw my works for 40 years, therefore I was angry with this generation, and said they always go astray in their heart, and they did not know my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Take care, brethren, that there not be any one of you in an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. But encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Christ if we hold fast from the beginning of our assurance firm until the end, while it is said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as when they provoked me. For who provoked him when they had heard? Indeed, did not all those who came out of Egypt, led by Moses, and with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness, and to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were not able to enter because of unbelief. So, here in 3, we're reminded that he built a house where God can dwell. And this is not about confidence in ourselves, but a confidence in Jesus. So, this is here saying that you can tell yourself, yes, I can stand firm until the end. Because it states that both in verse 6, Jesus was faithful until the end, and in verse 14, that we're remained faithful until the end. And so then I remember being someone had mentioned there's a podcast, and I think his name is Chris Emerson out of Lindale. And he has a verse that he always talks about. He loves the shirt. He loves T-shirts, saying T-shirts, and it's more Jesus. Start with Jesus. And that's probably the best way that we could always place him first in everything that we do. If that's how you have to begin, he even mentions just your Monday, begin with Jesus. Maybe begin every sentence with Jesus. Whenever you study the New Testament, only think about what does this say about Jesus. If we can continue to remember him in everything that we do, then we can stand firm until the end. And the first step in that is baptism, as it is called, for the remission of sins. And if you have not done so tonight, you can come forward as we stand and sing.